Valentine's Day, a history of how it began and what the future of love looks like. From saints and spring rituals to penny post, printed cards, and digital signals, we explore how a tangled origin became a global ritual and where it's heading next. Every 14 February, millions of people run the same quiet test. Did you remember me? The day looks soft. Cards, roses, restaurant bookings, but it carries high stakes. It's a public proof of private attention. And people notice when the proof is missing. The strange part is that Valentine's Day wasn't built to be romantic in the first place. Its earliest roots are tangled, saints with overlapping stories, older Roman festivals, and later, medieval writers who changed what the date meant. What keeps it alive is less a single origin story and more a repeatable ritual that got easier, cheaper, and harder to ignore over time. The story turns on whether Valentine's Day is powered mainly by feelings or by the systems that make feelings legible. Key points. Valentine's Day has no single clean birth moment. It grew out of overlapping Christian commemorations, older Roman seasonal customs, and later cultural storytelling. The link between 14 February and romantic love arrives surprisingly late, becoming visible in medieval European literature rather than early church practice. The biggest acceleration came when love messages became cheap, private, and scalable, especially through 19th century printing and postal reforms. Victorian Britain helped set the template, ornate cards, anonymous notes, and even cruel satire, vinegar valentines, alongside sentiment. In the 20th century, greeting cards, chocolates, flowers, and advertising turned the ritual into a predictable economic season. Globally, cultures rewired the rules. Japan's chocolate-giving norms and White Day reciprocity demonstrate the rapid reprogramming of the holiday. The future is likely to be less about one true tradition and more about competing versions: romance, friendship, self-care, sustainability, and digital intimacy. Background: Valentine's Day is commonly linked to Saint Valentine, but the historical record is messy. Multiple saints share the name, and later legends, secret marriages, prison notes signed from your Valentine are popular because they feel explanatory, not because they are easy to prove. The date sits next to older Roman mid-February rituals, especially Lupercalia, a festival associated with purification and fertility and held on 15% February. Some modern accounts argue that late antique Christian leaders suppressed or redirected older practices. Others treat the replacement story as neat, but not fully evidenced. What's clearer is the later shift. By the Middle Ages, European ideas of love, seasonality, and social pairing began attaching themselves to the calendar, turning St. Valentine's Day into a day for lovers in the cultural imagination. Analysis. The analysis focuses on saints, Rome, and the issue of the origin. If you want a simple origin, Valentine's Day refuses to cooperate. One strand is Christian commemoration, a feast day associated with a martyr called Valentine. Another strand is the Roman seasonal calendar, where mid-February already carried themes of spring, fertility, and renewal. Later storytellers tied these strands together because it makes intuitive sense: a Christian feast taking over a pagan festival. But intuitive is not the same as proven. High-quality summaries tend to use careful language. Unclear, often linked, sometimes credited, because the evidence is uneven and the stories evolved centuries after the events they describe. This point matters because Valentine's Day's power is not based on strict historical accuracy. It's based on cultural usability, a date that people can agree to treat as meaningful, even if they disagree on why. The medieval switch, when the date becomes romantic. The romantic version of Valentine's Day arrived through medieval European culture, not early church policy. A key moment often cited is Geoffrey Chaucer's Parliament of Fowls, which links St. Valentine's Day with birds choosing mates, an image that turns the date into a naturalized romance marker. Scholars have even argued that Chaucer effectively invented the association in literature, because earlier links are difficult to find. Around the same wider period, the language of my Valentine shows up in surviving letters. A famous English example is Marjorie Bruce's 1477 message calling John Paston her right well-beloved Valentine, often highlighted as the oldest surviving Valentine's letter in English. The mechanism here is social, not mystical. Once love becomes something you perform through words, a calendar date becomes a convenient stage. Printing, pennies, and the Victorian takeoff. The biggest structural leap is when Valentine's Day stops being mainly handwritten and becomes mass repeatable. In Britain, the uniform penny post, introduced in 1840, and the arrival of the penny black stamp made sending letters dramatically simpler and cheaper. Suddenly, a romantic note could travel across the country for a predictable, affordable cost. That change did two things at once. It widened participation. Valentine's was no longer just for the elite, and it increased privacy. A card could be sent discreetly, even anonymously, which added a new emotional charge, curiosity, suspense, and plausible deniability. Victorian culture leaned into the possibilities: ornate lace paper, elaborate designs, and a booming stationer's market. It also produced the sharp-edged counter-tradition of vinegar valentines, mocking, insulting cards that show the day wasn't only about sweetness, it was also a platform for judgment. From romance to retail, how commerce locked in the ritual. Once a ritual becomes repeatable, it becomes marketable. By the late 19th century, gifts that fit the day, especially cards and chocolates, start to look like default choices because they are easy to buy, easy to understand, and easy to measure. The heart-shaped chocolate box is often credited to Cadbury in 1868, a neat example of how packaging can teach people what a holiday is supposed to look like. In the 20th century, major greeting card companies industrialized the cues, the kinds of messages, the visual language, and the expectation that a card is a baseline, not a bonus. Hallmark's own corporate history places its early Valentine's postcards, and then cards in the 1910s. The deeper point is not that companies invented love. It's that they standardized the proof of love into objects with price tags, making the ritual easier to perform and therefore harder to opt out of without consequences. Global rewrites treat the holiday as a template, not a tradition. Valentine's Day spread because it behaves like a template. Choose a person. Signal care. Do it on a shared date. Different countries. Then adapted the template to local social rules. Japan is the classic case. The pattern of women giving chocolate on 14 February, followed by men reciprocating on 14 March, White Day, is widely described as a modern commercial invention that tapped into social norms of return gifting. Once you see Valentine's as a modular system, its endurance makes more sense. You can swap the gift, swap the relationship type, or even swap the moral framing, romance, friendship, gratitude, self-care, and the date still works. What most coverage misses. Valentine's Day endures because cheap, private communication turned affection into an expected, low-friction signal. When postage and printing collapsed the cost of sending a message, the day gained a new incentive structure. It became socially safer to express interest and socially riskier to say nothing. That is how a nice idea becomes a norm, because the effort required drops, while the reputational downside of skipping it rises. Watch for two signposts that confirm this mechanism in the modern era. First, monitor whether platforms continue to integrate Valentine's prompts and frictionless gifting into messaging and social apps. Second, whether opt-out alternatives, friendship days, anti-Valentine's events, charity gifting keep growing, because backlash is what you get when a norm starts to feel compulsory. What happens next? In the short term, Valentine's Day will continue to split into parallel lanes. One lane is classic couple romance, cards, flowers, meals. and carefully curated symbols. Another lane is friendship and community versions that reduce romantic pressure while keeping the I remembered you signal. A third lane is anti-obligation Valentines. People rejecting the purchase requirement while still using the date to mark connection in cheaper, more personal ways. Longer term, the key change will be about trust and authenticity. The easier it becomes to generate perfect messages at scale, the more people will value signals that cost something humans can't automate: time, attention, planning, and specific memory. The main consequence is simple. Because norms follow convenience, whichever version of Valentine's becomes easiest to perform, while still feeling sincere, will dominate the next decade. Real-world impact. A couple in their late 20s doesn't argue about love. They argue about interpretation. You didn't plan anything versus we're fine. It's just a day. The conflict is really about effort becoming visible on a deadline. A single friend group uses 14% February as an excuse to meet, but quietly manages hierarchy: who gets invited, who brings someone new, and who acts unbothered. A romantic holiday serves as a status mirror. A small cafe doesn't need people to believe in its history. It needs them to believe in the ritual. Fixed menus, predictable bookings, and a brief window where making it special feels non-negotiable. Valentine's Day, after the emoji era. Valentine's Day will keep changing, but it won't disappear. It is too useful as a shared moment when people are permitted, almost required, to say the thing they usually leave unsaid. The pivotal point concerns the balance between meaning and performance. Automated messages and compulsory consumption will dominate the day, leading to increased backlash and alternative rituals. If it stays anchored in specific human attention, it will remain a powerful social tool, even as the gifts evolve. Watch the signposts: growth in low-waste gifting norms, continued global reciprocity spin-offs like White Day, and platform design choices that either deepen sincerity or reward shallow performance. Valentine's Day's significance is that it reveals how modern intimacy is shaped, not just by emotion, but by the systems that let emotion travel.